think there's still some ways to go, and especially for the female player, because technology has changed, social media has changed, media has changed. We have to be careful to make sure we support the players, the practitioners, the coaches correctly with the right information to help their growth and development.
Hi everyone, welcome to Teaming Up with Becky Sauerbrunn, brought to you by the Women's Game. I'm Becky, and this is a show where we meet people in and around the game of soccer, the leaders, the thinkers, the doers, and connect with who they are by talking about what they love and what they nerd out on. Today, we are teaming up with the incredibly smart, insanely dedicated, and one of the most compassionate coaches I've ever worked with, Dr. Dawn Scott. Dawn is a global high-performance advisor specializing in women's soccer. She's the former performance coach of the U.S. Women's National Team. She was the secret sauce, the mad scientist, the X Factor, literally one of the reasons we won back-to-back World Cups in 2015 and 2019. Her work as a sports scientist, both on the research side and the coaching side, is revolutionary. She's trained so many elite athletes to their best forms on the field, all while being a supportive shoulder to lean on off the field. Dawn is passionate about closing the gap on sports science research on female athletes. She's been all over the world to speak on her experience with players and continues to spread awareness on how to maximize their performance and wellness. Dawn is one of the rare coaches I've worked with who values all sides of the player. She knows that to get the best out of someone, they need an understanding of how these facets work in isolation, but more importantly, how they all work together. Throughout this conversation, you'll continuously hear Dawn bring in all the sides of the player experience triangle and why she's considered one of the best at what she does. Here's my conversation with Dr. Dawn Scott. Dawn, it's so good to see you again. Welcome to Teaming Up.
Thank you so much. I feel absolutely flattered.
I'm so glad that I can share your story and your work with our listeners. Something I actually don't know, however, is how you got into soccer in the first place. So if you could take us back to chapter 1, young Dawn playing footy with a youth club in Washington, England. What did the landscape of women's soccer in England look like when you played?
Well, it's funny you say that because there wasn't a youth soccer club in England, in Washington. I grew up as the youngest of 3 daughters. I don't know how I got into it, but I'd literally get home from school and I'd go out and play football in the street with the boys. We'd put jumpers down on the fields, like the old adage, jumpers for goalposts, and we'd literally be doing that. At school, there wasn't a chance to play. I asked if I could play football, soccer, and I was told no, it's just for boys. And at school, we had the opportunity to play netball and field hockey, and they were deemed to be the more feminine sports. When I was about 13, 14, my mum called up a local radio station to say, I've got a daughter who's passionate about playing football. Are there any teams in the region? And there was a team, but it was, I don't know, a couple of bus rides away. Parents had split up. We didn't have a car at the time, and it was just too much, when I was going to school. So I didn't really play coached, formalised football until I went to university at 18. I'm old, Becky. I'm old. There wasn't the opportunity back in the 70s and 80s for girls to play football in England. I still feel like now if I had the opportunity to, be in an academy or be coached from 5, 6 years old, I could maybe compete with yourself and some of the other players I've maybe worked with. But there wasn't really an opportunity for girls to play football back then.
So what was it about the game that you fell in love with?
It's interesting, like in playing like after school, I don't know, I think some of it was the camaraderie, some of it was the social element, some of it was the competitive piece of football, obviously also being like an activity. And then around about the same time when I was 10, 12, remember again, paternal, like dad took me to my first Newcastle game and just the buzz of going to the game. And then when I was 13, 14, I used to go with a neighbour's son. I'd go on the bus with him up to the matches because my dad couldn't always go. And, back then it was like, it was all standing room and they had these kind of barriers in the middle to break up the crowd. And I remember when we go to the games, like the boy I'd go with would almost put me in front of a barrier so I didn't get like crushed like in the crowd. So I think it was just like this buzz and love of football. And I don't know, I can't really explain anything beyond then. It was just, I was like encapsulated by the game and the whole atmosphere and, the fan support as well, like the passion of Newcastle fans with the team. And then again, that was the main sport on TV back then was football. So again, you grew up watching it, you go out in the street playing it. And so all the role models there were male players and male people involved in the game.
I am so glad that you mentioned Newcastle. I remember Jill Lloyden and I sneaking into the team store to buy you a jersey while we were in Newcastle during the 2012 Olympics. And I texted Jill to see if she remembered which player's jersey we picked for you, and we couldn't remember. She thought it was either Fabrizio Colaccini or Papi Cisse. I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you still have that jersey? And do you remember which player was on the back of it?
It's tucked away, and it actually wasn't a playing jersey. It was a training top, and you put my name on the back. So you put Scott on the back, and I totally remember that from the Olympics and the note that you guys put in there. So yeah, it was my name on the back of there. So I've probably wore that for a long time.
I can't wait to tell Jill that she got it completely wrong. Well, you went on to study sports science at a few different universities. You stacked up degrees in sport and exercise science, nutrition, directorship. It seems like early on in your education, you decided to concentrate on the biological and performance side of the game. Was there a moment, like a particular moment leading into your time in uni that made you want to study that in particular?
Well, it's interesting because I actually started a physics degree because, again, back when I was looking to go to university, sports science wasn't really a big thing to study. It was like a new thing that maybe a few colleges did. And the process over here was that you applied for top 5 universities based on grades that you predicted to get. And you would go and visit all these universities to then rank which ones, like, was your first choice, second, whatever. And so my first choice was always physics degree at Nottingham University. I loved physics at school. Again, nerdy. I did maths, physics, electronics were my A levels at school. After the first year, you had to choose your modules, your electives for the next year, and I chose astronomy. And I remember sitting in a lecture, like surrounded by very smart looking male nerdy people, thinking, where has this taken me? I think I'd suddenly had a light bulb moment of, I don't want to be an astronaut. I don't know where this takes me. And so we managed to withdraw from that course. And then I actually did a year of accountancy, and then same. I was like, yeah. And then eventually I found sports science that way. I more and more places did sports science. And so it was kind of third time lucky that I'd started 2 different degrees. I then worked for a year to get a bit of kind of money funding behind me. And then I found sports science at Manchester Metropolitan University, and yeah, it just kind of all took off and grew from there, to be honest.
Dodd, that is so fascinating. I also took a couple astronomy courses
Oh, you did?
at college. Yeah, I took one and it was kind of more general. And I was like, okay, I'll take one that's like a little bit more specific. And I got into the first class and the professor started talking and I was like, I made a huge mistake. So I definitely was like, I got to get out of this class for sure.
Yeah, same. I was like, oh, yes, this is beyond me, this one.
Yeah, exactly. So you started working with the FA in 2001 as head of exercise and sports science with England's youth and senior national teams. And that was your first time you got to really put your knowledge to the test and really impact player performance firsthand. Is there anything that stands out from those early years in your career with the FA, a moment or a player that made you feel like your job was seriously beneficial?
I mean, I think starting out anyway, it was defining what the job was, because sports science in women's football was not a thing, hadn't been done, and also any research on female players was not really available. So I think that was one, and then I think 2007 we finally qualified for a major tournament. Ironically, in that tournament we got beaten in the quarterfinals by the US, but that was almost the moment where you're like, okay, now everything's coming together. Now you can see progress in the players physically. Again, Hope Powell, the head coach, had fought to get some centralised contracts, so players now could reduce the kind of work that they had to do outside the football, and now they had more opportunity to train kind of towards full time. I mean, they weren't full time training really until into, I don't know, 2010 and beyond. So again, I think it was qualifying for that major tournament in 2007. And again, then preparing the players ready for that, going through a whole preparation camp, the heat in Macau, etc., to be ready in China for the World Cup in 2007.
I feel like people can be resistant to change and to progress. And I was wondering if there was a moment where you realized that sports science still had a ways to go before becoming a truly valued aspect of elite football.
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I still think I still think you can get different opinions, and I think again across the 20 odd years I've been involved, technology has changed so much, but we've also come full circle on some things like heart rate monitors. Like I just mentioned, back in 2001, we didn't have GPS systems, so you didn't have those trackers that followed the players around the pitch. We had heart rate, which is your internal training load. So your heart rate tells you how you respond to the external load, so the distance that you're covering. So back in the early 2000s, you only had heart rate, and then suddenly these fancy GPS systems came in, so everybody shifted across to those. I think there's still some ways to go, and especially for the female player, because technology has changed, social media has changed, media has changed. There's more disinformation, misinformation on the internet. We have to be careful to make sure we support the players, the practitioners, the coaches correctly with the right information to help their growth and development.
I love that you've started to nerd out already on the metrics, because in February of 2010, you made the move to the US. You were hired as the high performance manager for the US Women's National Team. I came into the team later that year because we were preparing for the 2011 World Cup qualifier. So it was this very important stretch of preparation leading into that qualification tournament. And I remember being overwhelmed my first day. Starting with the morning check-in, we filled out a wellness form with questions like, how did you sleep? How rested do you feel? Are you sore? Where are you sore? Are you on your period? What day are you on your period? Your weigh-in number, your hydration number. And it was when you were testing our urine for our hydration numbers, and I agonized about how much urine do I need to put into this cup. And I mean, don't even get me started on the weightlifting programs. I've never seen so many variations of a single leg squat in my life. And I remember thinking, wow, if this is how detailed and meticulous they are about our recovery and wellness every day, the soccer part is going to be absolutely outrageous. And you always used to use the phrase, the aggregation of marginal gains, throughout your tenure with us. Mm-hmm. And we certainly practiced what you preached, but I was hoping that you could explain what you meant by the aggregation of marginal gains.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of stole that phrase from British cycling, where basically for me, it's looking at every element of a player's and athlete's performance. And if you can try and support the player in each of those areas, then if you can get a 0.001% gain in each area, then suddenly all of those small gains add up to a big difference. So, for example, in football and soccer, if we think about a player's endurance or fitness or speed or change of direction or nutrition or recovery, for a Becky Sauerbrunn, okay, which area is the area where we can get the biggest gains? Well, nutritionally, you were already very professional and very good at what you did. Recovery, you were very good. Strength training, you were very good. We at times chase the endurance element to get some gains there for you, but always looking at the other areas. You look at, say, Heather O'Reilly, and her endurance, and a Kelly O'Hara was always very high. So again, for a Heather especially, it was looking at recovery or looking at nutrition. So it was always looking at the whole spectrum of performance. Then add in psychology, add in the well-being, and those well-being forms. I had like piles and piles of those forms by the end of my time at US Soccer. But again, it was trying to get an individual footprint of every player, because I remember how you used to respond on the wellness forms was very different to some other players. So again, it was looking for some trends across the team, but also that individual response in terms of how we might have to support the individual player on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it was all worth it, all the urine collection and single leg squats, because what a run we had over the next 9 years. Runners up at the 2011 World Cup, gold medalists in 2012, back-to-back world champions in 2015 and 2019, so not too shabby at all. And when players are interviewed or asked about how we accomplished the things that we did, a huge majority of us always mention you as being a critical reason for our success. Could you please talk about the pride you feel in those moments, knowing that your methods, your hard work, your passion gave us that extra advantage that led us to become champions?
I mean, again, I don't know if you can see me shuffling in my seat, but I feel very flattered when you say that, and very honoured, because, again, I think I'm somebody who's only ever come from, a kind of hard-working background and worked hard at what I do. And I don't think I've ever been maybe the smartest in my field, but I've always worked hard and also had this ability to almost sense like players in terms of how they feel at certain moments and certain times. And as you know, in tournament football, and also between camps when you're in selection mode or not selection mode. But, when you're in tournament football, it's demanding. It's like you're in a bubble for 50, 60 days and every training session counts. And sometimes there's no days off for like, I don't know, 7, 10, 14 days because of the back-to-back tournaments. And I just always had this sense, because I felt like we'd spent so much time together, of how individual players felt. And so I think hearing any player give that feedback is, satisfying and gratifying. And maybe the 2015 tournament, I didn't enjoy I didn't embrace the journey or the process as much, but I made sure from 2015 to 19, I kind of embraced it all a bit more to experience some of those bits. And then even at the 2019 World Cup, get to know some of your friends and family, because for me, it was, just remembering that there's people behind the players. And I think just putting all of that together, and it was such an amazing 9, 10 years. Like at times I'm like, oh, I'd love to go back and do it again. Other times I'm like, no, because it was so much hard work. But I mean, there are lived experiences and nobody can ever take those away from us. And they were just amazing moments.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to be asking you kind of about that, like, spidey sense that you had about players and getting to know them as humans. You truly came into the spotlight for championing the measurement of player metrics that changed the way that we trained, right down to what you're famously known for in your field, which is menstruation-aware player management programs. And this is still a relatively new concept in women's sports. Can you expand on the need for this type of awareness and how you see it being applied in elite environments?
Yeah, no, I mean, for so many years, again, because there was a lack of like research or information, obviously being a female myself, I was aware of the menstrual cycle and hormones, but it's such an individual response and impacts individuals like, totally separately. So again, with the menstrual cycle, we have like high level kind of overview is fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone throughout your menstrual cycle. The typical menstrual cycle is 28 days, but not that many females have the typical cycle. And so the range is 21 to 35 days. Again, it was really working with the individual to identify their individual kind of cycle. Education was key. So again, I don't know if you remember, but back in 2019, myself and Julian Haig, we traveled to all of the NWSL teams and we delivered an education session to the players, but also to the coaches and the staff. And then after that, we asked you all just to start tracking individually, and then, worked really closely with Lindsay Langford and Chef T around the nutrition leading into the World Cup and having, nutrition available to try and reduce the severity and some of the symptoms that some players experience. But it really was supporting the individual player and trying to break the taboo of it kind of being a conversation that we couldn't have. And then since then, really, probably kind of since I left you guys, almost introduced the same with the England team, with, again, education initially and then individual support, tracking and monitoring. Like the individual support is a key. And then similar, when I went back into the NWSL across Washington Spirit, Olympique Lyonnais, London City, almost introduced the same, but then also added in Oura rings for tracking, heart rate, temperature, which again, in the second half of the cycle, you tend to see an increase in temperature. So again, added in that as more of an objective measure. And again, the big thing the whole time was education of the players, the staff, and obviously educating the players to empower them to, take ownership of their kind of own performance and recovery.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. And there is an ACL epidemic in women's soccer. And often the first question asked after a player suffers an ACL rupture is, are you on your period? And like you said, periods are already a pretty taboo topic, to the point where young women stop participating in sport when they hit puberty because there's a lack of support and awareness. Do you worry that periods are being further stigmatized with the correlation to injury? And could that lead to more women leaving the sport?
The period is one part of the menstrual cycle where, again, like I said, it's 21 to 35 days of fluctuating hormones every single day. This link to periods and ACL injuries, there's no scientific research out there that would support that link. So I think that's first and foremost. I think, obviously, as an athlete, if you have an ACL injury or any injury and you're on your period, like, it's a known time point other than the 2 to 5 days you're on your period, you don't know where you are in your cycle. I listened to Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird's podcast a few months ago where, again, Megan said she'd been had 3 ACL injuries, and she said every one she'd been on a period. And then Sue said in 1998, when she did her ACL, the first thing the doctor asked her, are you on your period? So again, who's painting that narrative? Is it the media? Is it staff, practitioners, medical staff who ask that question? But for Megan's, and I mean, this is common, but for Megan's third ACL injury, she obviously done 2 in college, and then a third was in 2015. Don't know if you remember, in Hawaii for the part of the victory tour after the 2015 World Cup win. And so after that World Cup win, admittedly she wasn't as conditioned, was traveling a lot, rightly so, doing appearances in media. We then had this final series of victory tour games in Hawaii, where for her it's a flight from Seattle, so 6-hour flight, 3-hour time zones. And if you remember the pitch, it was a grass pitch, and around the outside there was a turf kind of runoff, those pitches where you have the grass, and so that's where Megan landed. And so I think for that third one, you go, what was the cause? Was it because she'd already had 2 and that's already an increased risk factor for an ACL? Was it the travel? Was it the jet lag? Was it the deconditioned? Was it the pitch? There's just so many factors that we don't fully know, and every ACL is almost like an individual one in itself. And for everyone that maybe is reported that a player is on the period, how many are reported where they're not on the period? And so I think that is a big one that we do have to break, because it is misinformation. It's just not accurate. Actually, the rate of ACL injuries in adult female soccer players has almost stayed the same. In youth players, it's continued to increase, but in adult females, it's stayed the same. In youth, is it more linked to a little bit of what you said? Are they don't have education around menstrual cycle? You do have female, like girls dropping out of sport because they don't get that education. They drop out because they're trained like boys, but also the social media kind of desire to be thin and almost non-athletic. So again, some research by Steph Cohen on girls was that they feel like the gym is just preserved for males, that they don't belong in the gym, so they don't feel comfortable going in and doing strength work in the gym. So again, some of that society influence factors of girls not feeling welcome in the gym, so don't do the strength work. And then also in the youth pathway, you tend to have maybe less experienced, less qualified coaches or personnel or volunteers because of it being the grassroots nature. So a girl's not getting the appropriate athletic development at those younger ages and or at college. So I just think it's so multifactorial of, yes, a little bit sex differences, but also gendered considerations of what support do girls get through the pathway, the society influence, and then also technology. So footwear. So again, female foot is wider front foot, narrower heel, but how many boots are simply like, cleats are simply like shrink it and pink it and not really designed on the female foot, which again can have an impact on the biomechanics, but then also the type of like stud configuration, again, is that conducive to the surface that the player's playing on? So I just think there's so many factors need to be considered.
So
we
many
need to
factors.
Do a massive study to determine it all.
I mean, I just learned a lot within that last few minutes, and which is indicative of just who you are, because you have always taken that extra step to educate us about everything, about training, weightlifting, recovery, wellness, and you just didn't give us a list of exercises to do or vitamins to take. We always knew as players, if Dawn is leading this meeting, then we are going to get a PowerPoint presentation heavy with graphics and figures and timelines. And you care so deeply about the science and reasoning and making sure that we also knew that. Why is the educational aspect so important for you when working with pro athletes?
For me, I just think if you can explain the why, you tend to get buy-in. And, early in my career, like I'm not, probably I would initially have been embarrassed to say, but I probably did it wrong at times where, maybe it's like physical profile and physical testing. I would do a standard battery of fitness tests, maybe it's at the start of the season, mid-season, end of season. But then, as you got more experience as a practitioner, I almost moved more towards like invisible monitoring where you're maybe getting your max speed from a GPS unit. So actually you're not asking the players to do anything above and beyond, kind of almost some of the menstrual cycle tracking. I feel like some potentially gravitate towards not being honest there because they feel it'll affect their selection or their performance. And it's not about that. It's about empowering the players, new players, with the tools to be the best on any day of your cycle or any day of kind of your living, to be the best version of you. Like, that was always one of my taglines: be the best version of yourself, because everybody else has taken. So yeah, I think just that individual footprint was always key and important, but then having the variety amongst the players, because some probably didn't need to do that in terms of just tell them, just do it this way, because then, they're going to do it. Whereas, with yourself and others who, understood more or were more professional or more diligent and etc. I think given the options was, the way of working together and getting better buy-in.
We spoke a little bit about your individualization of these programs. You compared me to Heather O'Reilly, vastly different athletes, but you did base every program on a myriad of testing that we would do. And the main test being the dreaded beep test, where we would run 20 meters out and back in time with a series of beeps that would steadily increase in time as the test progressed. And you run until you can't keep up with the beeps, and the results are used to gauge aerobic capacity. And then you'd also add on to that jump testing, strength testing, blood testing. We would do DEXA scans, which tell you about bone density and body composition. And so physically, you knew us better than most of us knew ourselves, but you didn't just leave it at that. We all had a real sense that you cared about us as people. Why was it so important for you to not just craft individual training programs for us, but to form relationships that did allow for vulnerability and psychological safety?
I think, again, just that. I think, again, I think in life anyway, if you feel that somebody cares about you, I think you're gonna, just trust them more or give them greater buy-in. And so that's just part of my DNA of who I am as a person, and just being that honest, open person, having the emotional intelligence with each individual. Because again, you look at the rosters across 2015 and 2019, so many different personalities, so many different individuals. And again, you couldn't treat every single person the same way. And, the different ages, like you think about post 2015 when we had, Mal, Lindsay Horan, Sonnet, Rose Lavelle come in. Again, it was a different need for those players as opposed to some of you more kind of senior experienced players and kind of what you needed. But again, that's where also using you guys as leaders and role models for those younger players to aspire to, because, some of them didn't have those training kind of habits, or it's all about behaviors as well, isn't it? Of some of those younger ones learning those learned behaviors. So again, I think having that individual lens or understanding of each player helped you build a relationship, and then, have the conversation around what support that individual player would need and thrive on. Like yourself, like you had some of your support system in place, and, if I'd have come in and said, no, you can't use that, you've got to do it this way, then I'm probably not going to get your buy-in. And you might do this program, but you probably go and do that program as well. So, that's not conducive to what we need. And so again, I think it's working with the individual to respect them in terms of what they feel like works for them and needs for them as well.
You certainly went above and beyond, so much so that you wrote personalized notes for every single one of us on the eve of the World Cup final. I was really touched by the sentiment, especially because I had no idea where you found the time to do that during the tournament. Honestly, if anyone was like, where's Dawn? It's just go to the recovery room. She's probably making our protein shakes right now. And one part of the note that I remember very distinctly, probably because you underlined it, I think you would have highlighted it if you could have, was that you raved that I had beat my own personal best top speed after chasing down Sam Kerr in one of the group stage games. And I'm using myself as an example of how you've given players a real tangible advantage that plays directly into the group success. So when you get that specific piece of data that shows a player hit a top speed or covered more ground or achieved a record metric, do you give a little fist pump? What's your reaction?
I mean, yeah, it's very exciting. I mean, after every game, we debrief with the technical team and, the rest of the performance team, some of the results. And yeah, you would yeah, I would always geek out if somebody got a new personal best, whether it was on the beat test or the jump test or the sprint test. I think some of it's about that as well, of giving players the added confidence either within a tournament or leading into a tournament that, just where they are physically and that they can't be matched and touched. And so, yeah, I mean, get super geeked out and excited at things like that. But not like me personally, like for the player, like that, they've pushed and achieved and, got higher than they've ever gone before. So, yeah, I remember that.
So near the end of 2019, you made the decision to leave the US Women's National Team to go back home to England and work for the FA, effectively breaking all of our hearts. But when you look back at your time with the US Women's National Team, what stands out to you the most?
Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh, there's so many moments. So many moments. I mean, the 2011 World Cup in the quarterfinal against Brazil, extra time when we're losing. Friga wins it, gives it to Carly, out to Rapinoe, Abby's goal. Even like in the debrief meeting, Pino saying when she jumped on Abby, she wet herself a bit. I mean, that was such an epic moment because I just think, I don't know if you remember before 11, 15, 19, we played our send-off games all at Red Bull. And you look at the attendance in all those 3 games and just how they went like that. So like that's obviously a massive moment. Yeah, incredible. Just incredible moments. And yeah, sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, it went so fast. Like I said earlier, I'd love to do it all again. And then you're like, oof, that
Oh,
was
it was
hard
hard.
work. But you know what I'd love though? Like now when you look at women's football and the investment and the environments and the professional environments, part of me would love to like pick up that whole group of us and do it at this time when there's all of that investment. And I don't know, just see how it is with all of that investment behind it. Yeah, I mean, incredible moments, incredible people, incredible times.
You didn't stay away from the States for very long because you came back in 2021 to work with the MLS club Inter Miami as their VP of Performance and Innovation. And I'm curious what went into your decision behind wanting to work with the men's side after spending so much time and research on female athletes.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. I think, like you said earlier, I came back and worked with England for 18 months and then just kind of stepped away from that. It just kind of wasn't working out within, some of the drive for the female athlete and things like that. So I kind of stepped away and decided I was going to maybe consult for a while. And then with England, I'd worked with Phil Neville and the role came up at Inter Miami and he kind of mentioned it. And I'm somebody, it's funny, like back in 2007, I think it was, I applied for a fitness sports science role at Newcastle, like my team, and I didn't even get shortlisted or an interview. And other than that, I've never been somebody who's chased working in the men's game. But this one just felt, I was like, okay, there was nothing else on the horizon. I was considering consulting. And so, David Beckham was obviously the owner. Inter Miami was, their second, third year. And so I applied and I went through the whole process. Chris Henderson was their sporting director then, a great person and, great leader. And I was like, you know what, let's do it. And so I went out there and it was a great year. I kind of loved it. It was the first year I actually didn't travel to away games with the team. So that was an interesting transition. Like the first weekend I was a bit lost. I was like, oh, what's my role? And then after that, I was like, oh, this is great. I get some extra time just for me.
While you were at Inter Miami, Washington Spirit owner Michelle King approached you and said, you're wasting your time with men's football. Come work for the Spirit. And you did, but not without some changes. And you presented a plan to the Spirit that saw a fully staffed medical and performance team that included a female health specialist and a medical team that could truly cater to 25, 30 players. And in your own words, it was a bit ballsy, but Michelle King looked it over and thought it was great. And I've been on teams where our medical and performance staff numbered at 2 or 3 people, and some of those were part-time contractors. And so what you presented to King was unheard of at the time. Wherever you are, you keep raising the ceiling for the health and wellness of women's players, setting new standards in your field. Do you think that's reflective of your leadership style?
I think so, because I think I'm somebody who, and you probably know this, like if I introduce something, we'd almost consolidated and then introduce something new. Like I wouldn't, well, I hope I didn't like introduce 10 different things at the same time. It would be almost introduce something and then consolidate it, make sure you understand, and then maybe look, what else can we add into the pot? I think a big thing for me as well is that we shouldn't just copy and paste what's been done in men's sport. Being brave and curious to do it differently. And I think that was in that plan, which the whole thing was around train women as women, provide holistic 360 support so that every single player had everything they needed, from psychology, nutrition, female health support was a big part of it. Again, it was just looking at that full picture of best support for every single player in the squad.
You are still hard at work spreading awareness about the importance of specialized programs for female athletes, working with FIFA as a technical consultant and speaking at fitness summits, continuing to share your research and player performance experience to equip female athletes all over the world. But nowadays, you also have a bit more time to focus on your own wellness. You've been traveling, participating in charity runs, doing some reading. How does your work reflect your appreciation for your own wellness journey?
That's a great question, because I think during my time, like with clubs and national teams, and I've had a few conversations with people about this recently, I do think in elite sport, it's very, very hard to get the right work-life balance because, as like elite sport is demanding. You have to be resilient. It's non-stop. You look at the NWSL now, they come in for pre-season January, and, the teams that get to the championship are like end of November, start of December. So it's an 11-month calendar. And, there is a danger that staff in the women's pro leagues can get burnt out. So I think part of my strategy, especially when I was on the road, was probably two things. I would always prioritize making sure I got to the gym and my sleep. They were the two big things. And then the ginger shots whenever Chef Team made them. And so I'd always look at, I'd always look at the schedule for the next day and say, okay, right, I need to be in the gym at this time. Okay, if I want to get 7-8 hours sleep, I need to be in bed at this time. I think trying to be more present with family, I think, is also a big one where, as the player you've been across your years, you're just pulled everywhere and you have missed family events or not being present in phone calls because I'm thinking about 10 other things. So, I think it's trying to be a bit more mindful. I've started doing yoga and, be a bit more present along with everything else.
I mean, you really do strike me as just a lifelong learner. And I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate you on your PhD. It was super cool getting to call you Dr. Dawn Scott in the introduction. And your thesis was on developing training models for elite female football players. And I'm wondering, if you had to do another PhD thesis, what would it be on?
That's a great one. I did a master's in sports directorship, and my dissertation on that was on the underrepresentation of females in high performance director roles. And so I think it would probably be something around that, like leadership, of the lack of females in leadership roles in sport and executive decision making, like, research on the current status, and then what can we do to actually a framework maybe is to improve, how many females do have the opportunity, or how can we improve the opportunities for females in kind of those decision making roles. I think there's a lack of females in key positions, in key roles in women's sport, and I think we need to better that and be better at that. And I'd love to try and help and solve that.
Dawn, thank you for being here. I'm really grateful that we could reconnect. We like to end our show by asking our guests, what are you currently nerding out on? It can be a piece of art, a genre of media, a certain book series, anything that's really piqued your interest.
Okay, so I was going to bring it to show you, but it started raining outside, so I couldn't. You're very intrigued now, aren't you?
I am.
So because I've had a bit more time on my hands this year, I was fascinated at trying to grow some sunflowers. And so I literally now in the garden, I think I've had 2 of like fully flourished, and I've got about 30 which are about ready to kind of break out and flourish. So and I've actually got one that when I measured it, it's taller than me. So it's kind of over 2 meters tall. So that's probably been kind of part of my nerdy thing. Like, you look out in the morning, I'll be out there watering the plants and the sunflowers and then turning them, adjusting them so that they face the sun. Like, in England, we don't get a lot of sun, but have had a good summer. or I'll be pulling off the dead leaves. So yeah, I've kind of become a bit green fingered over the last few months, and have got my own little plot of sunflowers going.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely do not have a green thumb. So whenever people talk about gardening or anything like that, I'm always like, that's fascinating and probably something I will never get into.
Yes, yeah. And I'm sure you were not expecting that from me.
I expect everything from you, honestly. Like nothing you say would ever surprise me. But thank you so much for being on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. It was really great to see you again. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
So horticulture has definitely never been my thing, but it does warm my heart to hear that Dawn now has the time to grow sunflowers and visit with family in Malaysia and all the things that sometimes get sacrificed in pursuit of a career goal. I honestly don't remember a staffer working as hard as she did during our time together. I enjoyed nerding out with her back then, and I equally enjoyed nerding out with her during our conversation. Through her research and education, she'll continue to raise the bar for all athletes, and we are very fortunate to have her as part of the women's soccer community. This week, I've been nerding out on prepositions, and I never knew my English major was going to be put to such good use making these podcasts, but here I am, constantly looking up the correct preposition to go with my noun to make sure it works with the rest of the sentence in the way that I need it to. You'd be amazed how using the preposition of as opposed to for can change the entire meaning of a sentence. And don't even get me started on the correct use of commas. I'll save that for another podcast. Let us know what you're nerding out about right now. Email us at teamingup@meninblazers.com and join our nerd squad. Our quirky community is growing, and we're so glad to have you along for the journey. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with more next week.